Now, if you're betting on football or you're using a Betfair trading strategy like lay the draw, what's the best way to figure out if you should lay the draw? Well, the best thing to do is to be able to predict it. So that's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to run through the process of how you can predict a draw in a football match. So the first thing that we must do is look at the average number of goals scored within a match. The reason that we're doing this is so that you've got a basis on which you can sort of look at understanding how many goals you're likely to forecast, because very often when people are trying to predict correct scores, they get all of the sort of fundamentals wrong. Because football itself, generally, there aren't that many goals in a lot of matches. We'd love to see loads of goals, but generally that doesn't occur. If we look at this graph, you can see on the far left-hand side that there are about 8% of matches that end with no goals at all. In other words, the scoreline must have been 0-0. And then you can see it bumps up a bit towards 1 goal in a match, and therefore obviously it must have been 1-0 to either side. And then when we get to 2, then it could have actually been 2-0, 0-2 or 1-1. And then when we get to 3 goals, you can see it starts to drop off a bit, because that could be a 3-0 to either side or a 2-1 to either side. But of course, you can't draw a match with 3 goals in it, can you? But you can basically see on this graph the average number of goals that you tend to see in a football match. And the reason that I'm showing you this is so that it gives you a range in which you can actually put your forecast, because we are actually going to have to do a little bit of forecasting here and look at a little bit of data in order to be able to come out with a reasonably accurate position. But this is what this graph is doing. It's basically telling you on average how many goals you tend to see in a football match. So this is where we dig a little bit deeper. What we're going to do now is work out how many goals are going to be scored by either team. And goals are important because, well, that's how you win a football match. If we're looking at tennis, we'd be focusing on the number of points that are likely to be scored by each player. And because we're looking at football, we're looking at the number of goals that are likely to be scored by each team. It just makes perfect sense. And we already know how many goals we can expect roughly within a match, because we looked at that graph that sort of said the chance of no goals is quite low, but still possible. And then we saw on average there, generally it sort of rose towards 2 and so on. You've seen that graph. So what we need to do is we need to look at current form, we look at the league table, we look at all of those things, and we basically add up all of the data that we've got. We look at the home team and we say how many goals are they going to score. So we look at how many goals on average they've scored, how many on average they've conceded. We compare that to the away team on how many goals they've scored and how many they've conceded, and then we can combine the two of them. And then when you combine the two, that allows you to take into account things like local derbies, 2 teams playing each other at the top of the league, 2 teams playing each other at the bottom, and so on. But fundamentally what you're trying to come up with is a number for each team. You're trying to say, on average, the home team is going to score this many number of goals, and on average, the away team in this scenario is going to score that number of goals. If you look at the general average, it's about 1.5 to the home team and 1 to the away team, roughly. And the difference between the two generally is home advantage. But what you're looking for is a guide as to how many goals you think this team could score at home, and a guide as to how many goals you think the away team is likely to score. And once you have those 2 bits of information, it's relatively straightforward to be able to work out how many goals are likely to be scored. Now, I have done some more in-depth videos on this particular process, and I suggest that you go off and watch those if you want more detail. But fundamentally, that's what you're sort of trying to reach at this particular stage of the process. So this is where we need to have a look at a spreadsheet. Now, don't panic, because I've done 95% of the work for you over here. You just need to basically make your mind up about what numbers you want to put in, but it's important for me to explain how they sort of work together, as it were. And we're going to do this on this example over here, and I've made it sort of fairly simple, and like I said, I've done 90% of the work for you. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to disappear from here so that you can bring your attention to what you see over here, and we can explore it a little bit more in depth. So let's have a look at what we've got on this spreadsheet. I will explain it as simply as I possibly can. Running down the spreadsheet that we see here, this is the average number of goals that you expect your team to score. So on average, are they scoring 1.5 goals per match? Or your expectation is that they will score in this type of match 1.5 goals on average. So where is this data going to come from? Well, we have had a look at this fairly recently where we gathered a little bit of data, but you may want to put your own angle on it. Use a bit of form, more recent form, use some long-term data, adjust for certain factors within the match. But it's also important that you keep it within a general model. So there's no point in looking at the data and saying, oh yeah, I'm going to forecast 5 goals in this match. There has to be a really good reason why you think that would be the case, because the average number of goals scored is generally much lower than that. So yeah, take data, put your own spin on it, adjust it for what's going on within this particular match, and use that as a guide to come up with a number of goals that you think a team will score on average. And then across the top, we've got the number of goals that they will score in the next match. And I hear you saying, hey, Peter, we don't know how many goals they're going to score. And that's fine, because what I've done here is I've applied a thing called a probability density function to basically say, if a team scores 1.5 goals on average, what's the chance of them scoring 1 goal in the next match? Or what's the chance of them scoring 3 goals in the next match? So it's taking something that's occurred historically, and then it's basically saying, what's the chance of this occurring again? This is where I've simplified it massively for you. But basically what I'm using here is a probability density function. Go out and read up on that if you want to learn about that. I could do a whole video on it, but it would be quite boring. But basically you would use a probability density function to look at historical data and then say, if this has occurred this frequently in the past, how likely is it to occur in the future? That's exactly what I've done here. All you need to know is that this is going to be a reasonable model if you want to forecast the draw. So down here I basically said the home team on average has scored 1.5 goals and the away team has scored 1 goal. And then what I've done down here is I've said for the home team, if they've scored an average of 1.5 goals, what line are we looking up on the top here? So you can see it's looking up this particular line and it's transposing it down here. And then on the away team, you can see it's looking up the line of 1 goal. So you can see that it's summarizing it down here. So it's basically just saying, this is that line, this line here is that line there. It's just summarizing and making it easier for you to understand what we're looking at. And when we have those 2 bits of data, we're combining them. So we're multiplying 0.22 by 0.36 to give us 8% basically. What are we actually doing there? What have we done? We're basically saying, what's the chance of the home team not scoring in the next match? What's the chance of the away team not scoring in the next match? That's the chance of both teams not scoring. We have forecast 0-0. And you can see we then convert that to odds, which come out at about 12. But then what you see we've done is we've done exactly the same thing for 1, 2, 3 and 4 goals. So we're basically saying, what's the chance of the home team scoring 1 goal, the away team scoring 1 goal? In other words, it's a 1-all draw. We multiply those 2 percentages together, which gives us about 12%. And then we end up at odds of about 8. And then you can see we've done the same for 2-all, 3-all and 4-all. Once we've done that, we can actually add up all of those percentages to give us a total. In other words, the sum of all values of 0-0, 1-all, 2-all, 3-all and 4-all. That works out at about 26% on this particular occasion, and that comes out at odds of about 385. So you can see here that what we've done is we've taken historical data, we've put it into a function that is giving us the likelihood of something occurring going forward, and then we've combined those down here to come up with a total, which we've then converted into decimal odds. This is a simplistic model. It doesn't take account of all of the things, and there are slightly better models that you could use. But fundamentally speaking, if you want to predict the draw, this is the sort of route that you would go down. You use a bit of historical data, you tweak those numbers to figure out how many goals you think either team could score on average, combine that data, and that's what comes out with the result you've got at the bottom there. You have successfully predicted the chance of a draw in this next match. So that is how you would predict a draw. A fairly simple process to go through, but as always, there's a little bit of devil in the detail there, because if you put garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. In other words, you need to put some numbers in there that are realistic. That's where your edge will come from. Your ability to basically take some historical data, information that's current within the market, perhaps some team news or something, and then adjust that model to influence the number of goals that you think are likely to be scored. But also you may want to use a different sort of model in terms of how you're using that data to project forward. I've given you a very simple one here, but there are several variations that you could use in there as well. But basically we've taken that data, used it to forecast forward, and then just added up all of the possible correct scores that could end up as a draw to give us our final result. But if you want to know how to predict a draw, that's exactly how you would do it. Thank you for watching to the end of the video. Please like and subscribe and all those wonderful things. Not only does it make me feel like I'm producing half decent content, it also is a useful guide for me to produce more content in the future. Thank you very much for watching the video.